You know what nobody wants to admit? The world isn't fair. It never was and it never will be. Right now, someone less intelligent than you is commanding more respect. Someone less qualified is earning twice your salary. Someone with half your integrity is being listened to while you're being ignored. And here's the part that really stings. They're not succeeding despite being worse than you. They're succeeding because they understand something you don't. They've learned the brutal mechanics of psychological dominance. They've cracked the code that separates predators from prey in the human hierarchy. And while you've been playing by the rules, convinced that fairness and hard work will eventually win, they've been operating from a completely different playbook. A playbook written 2,500 years ago by a man who understood human nature so deeply that his strategies are still being used by military generals, corporate titans, and master manipulators today. Today, I'm going to show you 8 brutal laws from Sun Tzu's The Art of War that will fundamentally change how you move through the world. But I have to warn you, once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them, and you'll realize exactly who's been using them against you this entire time. Let me guess your situation. You've been the reasonable one, the rational one, the person who presents logical arguments, works harder than everyone else, and expects merit to speak for itself. And what has that gotten you? You watch less competent people get promoted. You see manipulators charm their way into positions of influence. You notice how the loudest person in the room somehow becomes the leader, even when they have nothing of substance to say. And the worst part, you can feel it happening, but you can't quite articulate why you keep losing these invisible battles. Here's what's really going on. You've been programmed. From childhood, you were taught a beautiful lie. Be nice, work hard, tell the truth. Wait your turn. Meanwhile, a small percentage of people figured out early that the social game has entirely different rules. They learned that perception trumps reality. That strategic silence is more powerful than desperate honesty. The person who controls the frame controls the outcome. You're not failing because you're incompetent. You're failing because you're playing chess while they're playing psychological warfare. And every single day you don't understand this. You're hemorrhaging respect, influence, and opportunity to people who understand what you're about to learn. The gap between where you are and where you want to be isn't about working harder. It's about understanding the mechanics of psychological dominance that Sun Tzu decoded 2,500 years ago. These aren't motivational platitudes. These are operational principles that create tangible, measurable shifts in how others perceive and respond to you. Let me tell you about a man who changed warfare forever. His name was Sun Tzu, and around 500 BC in ancient China, he wrote a military treatise so psychologically devastating that it's been continuously in print for 2.5 millennia. But here's what most people don't understand. The art of war isn't really about war at all. Sun Tzu was a military strategist who recognized that every human interaction is a battle for psychological positioning. Every conversation is a negotiation for dominance. Every social situation is a chess match where most people don't even realize they're playing. He understood that the greatest victories happen before any actual conflict occurs. In the realm of perception, positioning, and psychological authority, his book has been studied by Napoleon, used by the Viet Cong to defeat America, applied by corporate executives to dominate markets, and quietly implemented by people who seem to effortlessly command respect everywhere they go. Why? Because Sun Tzu didn't just write about battlefield tactics. He decoded the fundamental operating system of human psychology. He understood that humans are pattern recognition machines driven by perception, emotion, and hierarchy. And he created a framework for exploiting those patterns with surgical precision. His principles work in boardrooms, relationships, negotiations, and every social interaction you'll ever have. What I'm about to share with you are 8 laws extracted from his teachings that will fundamentally alter your psychological positioning. These aren't theories. These are battle-tested principles that have shaped the outcomes of wars, businesses, and personal interactions for 25 centuries. And after today, you'll start seeing them being used against you everywhere, which means you'll finally know how to counter them. Law number 1. This is perhaps Sun Tzu's most psychologically devastating principle, and it's the exact opposite of what you've been taught. You are told to be authentic, to show your true capabilities, to let your work speak for itself. That's terrible advice in a world where perception creates reality. Here's what this actually means. When you're in a position of strength, The amateur move is to flex, to show off your resources, knowledge, or capabilities. But the master? The master conceals their advantages. Why? Because the moment you reveal your full hand, you lose strategic optionality. Your competition adjusts. People prepare defenses. You trigger unnecessary resistance. But when you're actually vulnerable, that's when you project unshakable confidence. You act as though you have options, resources, and plans that don't exist yet. Not because you're lying, but because psychological positioning shapes material reality. When people believe you're strong, they treat you differently. They negotiate differently. They don't test boundaries they assume are fortified. Look at the most dominant people you know. They never look desperate, even when they are. They never reveal the full extent of their capabilities, even when they're crushing the competition. They operate from strategic ambiguity that keeps everyone off balance. Meanwhile, insecure people do the opposite. They brag when they're winning and collapse into visible panic when threatened. This broadcasts exactly where to apply pressure. Start implementing this tomorrow. In negotiations, never show how badly you need the outcome. In conflicts, never reveal your full argument immediately. In competition, never let them see your entire arsenal. The person who maintains strategic ambiguity controls the psychological frame. Law B2. Most people think dominance comes from confrontation, from winning arguments, from direct competition. That's the amateur's approach, and it's exhausting. Sun Tzu understood something far more sophisticated. The highest form of psychological dominance is making resistance psychologically impossible before conflict even begins. Here's what most people don't understand about power dynamics. Every time you enter direct conflict, even if you win, you've expended resources. You've created resentment. You've revealed your methods. The true master arranges circumstances so that opposition dissolves before it crystallizes. They don't defeat enemies. They make enemies irrelevant. How do you actually do this? By controlling the frame of perception. By shaping what others believe is possible, normal, or worth fighting for. By strategic positioning that make your outcome the path of least resistance. When you master this, people simply comply. Not because you forced them, but because you made your desired outcome feel inevitable, reasonable, or aligned with their own interests. Think about the people who get what they want without seeming to try. They're not lucky. They're engineering social situations so that resistance feels irrational. They're positioning themselves as the obvious choice before the decision is even made. They're occupying psychological territory that makes competition feel futile. This is why master negotiators don't argue. They reframe. Master influencers don't convince. They create contexts where their perspective becomes self-evident. Master leaders don't command respect through force. They architect situations where their authority feels natural and necessary. Stop trying to win fights. Start making fights unnecessary by controlling the psychological terrain where they would occur. Law number 3. Now this is where it gets uncomfortable, because you've been taught that deception is immoral, that good people are transparent, that authenticity means revealing everything, and that moral programming. That's exactly what keeps you subordinate to people who understand strategic information control. Let me be crystal clear. Sun Tzu isn't advocating lying. He's recognizing that every human interaction involves selective information disclosure. The question isn't whether you'll engage in strategic presentation. It's whether you'll do it consciously or let others exploit your naive transparency. Here's the brutal reality. When you reveal everything you're thinking, feeling, planning, or intending, you hand others a complete instruction manual for manipulating you. You broadcast exactly where you're vulnerable. You eliminate your strategic optionality. You become predictable, and predictable people are controlled people. Master operators understand that strategic opacity is a form of power. They don't lie. They simply don't provide ammunition for others to use against them. They cultivate calculated unpredictability. They maintain zones of privacy that preserve their psychological leverage. Think about poker. The cards you hold aren't lying, but revealing them would be strategic suicide. Social interactions work the same way. Your thoughts, plans, capabilities, and vulnerabilities are information assets. Protecting them isn't dishonest. It's strategically competent. This doesn't mean becoming paranoid or fake. It means developing conscious control over your information perimeter. It means stopping the reflex to explain yourself, justify your decisions, or provide unnecessary details about your thinking. The person who controls information flow controls the relationship's power dynamic. Start practicing strategic silence. Stop over-explaining. Stop justifying. Stop providing detailed accounts of your methods, plans, or reasoning to people who haven't earned that access. Watch how the power dynamic immediately shifts. Law 4. Here's something you've probably noticed. Some people seem to attract endless opportunities while you're grinding for scraps. You assume they were lucky, connected, or born into advantage. Sometimes that's true, but more often, they understand momentum mechanics that you don't. Sun Tzu recognized that psychological dominance creates a compound effect. Every victory, no matter how small, increases your perceived authority. Every successful move generates new opportunities. Every display of capability attracts more resources. Success literally breeds success through perception mechanics. But here's the part that's probably been sabotaging you. You're waiting until you feel ready, until you're perfectly qualified, until you've eliminated all risk. Meanwhile, people less capable than you are taking imperfect action, generating small wins, and riding that momentum upward. The most dominant people you observe aren't necessarily more talented. They're more aggressive about seizing opportunities before they feel ready. They understand that capability is built through action, not preparation. They know that each seized opportunity, even if imperfectly executed, creates evidence of capability that attracts the next opportunity. This is why the rich get richer, and the respected get more respect. Not because of some cosmic injustice, but because momentum is a psychological force multiplier. People who see you winning assume you'll keep winning. People who see you seizing opportunities assume you're the kind of person who gets things done. Stop waiting for permission. Stop preparing endlessly. Stop convincing yourself you need one more qualification. Take the opportunity in front of you right now. Execute it at 80% perfection, and use that win to generate the next one. Dominance is built through momentum, not through waiting for the perfect moment. Law 5. Most people have no idea who they're actually competing against. Worse, they have no accurate assessment of their own capabilities, weaknesses, or psychological patterns. This ignorance is why they keep losing battles they don't understand. Sun Tzu's principle here is brutally simple. In any competitive situation, the person with superior information wins, not the hardest worker, not the most talented, the one with the most accurate map of the territory. Here's what this actually requires. You need to become a student of human psychology, starting with your own. You need to identify your unconscious patterns, your emotional triggers, and your blind spots, because every unexamined weakness is an exploit waiting to be used against you. Then you need to study the people you're competing with, negotiating against, or trying to influence. What motivates them? What are they afraid of? What do they value? What patterns do they follow? Most people never bother with this level of analysis, which is why they're constantly surprised when they lose. The dominant operator walks into every situation with comprehensive intelligence. They've done reconnaissance. They know what matters to the other person. They've identified leverage points. They've wargamed multiple scenarios. They're not smarter, they're more prepared. This is why master negotiators research extensively before entering the room. Why do effective leaders understand their team members' individual psychology? Why successful competitors study their opposition obsessively? Information asymmetry creates power asymmetry. Stop moving through the world assuming everyone is motivated by the same things you are. Stop projecting your values onto others. Start becoming a psychological profiler who understands the specific human systems you're trying to influence. That's where real power comes from. Law 6. Here's a manipulation technique so effective it's almost unfair. When you want to influence someone, you don't lead with what you actually want. You lead with what confirms their existing beliefs and expectations. You give them psychological safety, and then you redirect. Sun Tzu understood that humans are prediction machines. We are constantly anticipating what comes next based on pattern recognition. When something matches our expectations, we relax. We stop analyzing critically. Our defenses are lower. And that's exactly when the master operator introduces the actual agenda. This is why the most effective influence never feels like manipulation. It feels like you're simply agreeing with what the person already believes. Like you're validating their worldview. Like you're on their side. And you are, until the moment you subtly redirect that agreement toward your desired outcome. Watch master salespeople. They never lead with the pitch. They lead with agreement and validation. You're absolutely right to be cautious about this. Now the person's defenses are down because you confirmed their skepticism. That's when you introduce the reframe that leads to purchase. Watch master politicians. They begin by acknowledging the audience's concerns, by speaking their language, by validating their perspective. Only after establishing that alignment do they introduce their actual agenda, now positioned as the logical extension of what the audience already believes. This isn't about being fake. It's about understanding the psychological architecture of influence. People don't resist ideas that feel like natural extensions of their existing beliefs. They only resist ideas that require them to admit they were wrong. Stop trying to convince people they're mistaken. Start confirming what they already believe. Then use that agreement as a bridge to where you want them to go. That's how you influence without creating resistance. Law number 7. Most people do everything backward. They enter conflicts hoping to figure it out as they go. They enter negotiations without knowing their walkaway point. They enter competitions without establishing the conditions for victory. And then they wonder why they keep losing. Sun Tzu's principle here is devastating in its simplicity. The outcome of any conflict is determined before it begins. Winners don't hope for victory. They engineer the conditions that make victory inevitable. Then they engage. Here's what this actually looks like. Before you enter any competitive situation, you establish an overwhelming advantage. You prepare more thoroughly. You control the framing. You set the terms. You position yourself so that you're competing from strength, not hope. Only then do you engage. This is the difference between people who seem to win effortlessly and people who struggle constantly. The effortless winners aren't lucky. They're only engaging in battles they've already won through preparation and positioning. They've done the invisible work of establishing advantage before the visible conflict begins. Look at successful entrepreneurs. They don't launch products and hope they sell. They build audiences first, validate demand, establish distribution, and then launch from a position where success is highly probable. Look at master negotiators. They establish leverage, develop alternatives, frame the terms, then enter negotiation from a position of strength. Stop entering situations where you're hoping for the best. Start doing the unglamorous work of establishing an overwhelming advantage before you engage. Stack the deck, control the terrain, set the terms. Then and only then make your move. That's how you develop a track record of consistent victory. Law number 8. Here's the final law, and it's perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated. Dominance isn't about being the strongest. It's about controlling what others believe about your strength, intentions, and next move. The master operator doesn't overpower. They disorient. When you're predictable, you're controllable. When people can anticipate your reactions, they can engineer situations that exploit those reactions. When they understand your strategy, they can prepare counters. Your consistency becomes your vulnerability. Sun Tzu understood that strategic unpredictability is a force multiplier. When your opponents can't predict your next move, they can't prepare. They can't form coherent strategies. They're forced into reactive mode, constantly adjusting to your initiative. You control the tempo. You control the frame. You control the psychological territory. This doesn't mean being random or chaotic. It means cultivating calculated variation in your patterns. It means occasionally doing the unexpected thing. It means maintaining strategic ambiguity about your capabilities, intentions, and methods. Watch the most psychologically dominant people you know. They're not consistent. They're strategically variable. Sometimes aggressive, sometimes withdrawn. Sometimes forthcoming, sometimes opaque. You can never quite predict them, which means you can never quite control them. Start breaking your own patterns. If you always respond immediately, sometimes wait. If you always explain yourself, sometimes you don't. If you always take the diplomatic approach, occasionally be direct. If you always compete directly, sometimes redirect entirely. Keep them guessing. Keep them off balance. That's where your power lives. So here's where you are right now. You have a choice. You can close this video, Go back to hoping that fairness and hard work will eventually be recognized and watch others continue to dominate you psychologically. Or you can accept the uncomfortable truth that the social world operates by rules you weren't taught, and start playing by the actual rules instead of the comfortable lies. Imagine 6 months from now. You walk into rooms differently. You're no longer the person who over-explains, who reveals too much, who hopes to be recognized. Instead, you're the person others are trying to figure out. The one who seems to get what they want without obvious effort. The one who commands respect without demanding it. The one who's psychologically untouchable, because you understand the game being played. That version of you already exists. It's just buried under layers of programming that taught you to be predictable, transparent, and naive. These 8 laws aren't about becoming someone you're not. They're about removing the social conditioning that's been keeping you subordinate. But here's what I need you to understand. While you're sitting here deciding whether to implement these principles, other people are already using them. Against you. Right now. In your workplace, your relationships, your negotiations. You're in a game whether you acknowledge it or not. The only question is whether you'll learn the rules or continue being played. This knowledge is uncomfortable because it reveals how much control you've been surrendering. How many opportunities have you lost because you didn't understand psychological positioning? How many times have you been outmaneuvered by people less capable but more strategically aware? If this resonated with you, if you felt that uncomfortable recognition that you've been playing the wrong game this entire time, then subscribe to this channel, because what I just shared is barely scratching the surface of psychological dominance. There are entire systems of influence, persuasion, and strategic thinking that will fundamentally alter your trajectory. Drop a comment telling me which of these 8 laws hit you hardest. Which one explained a pattern you've been experiencing but couldn't articulate? And share this video with someone who needs to understand what game is actually being played. The world isn't fair. It never will be. But once you understand the rules that actually govern human psychology, you stop being a victim of the game and start being a master of it. I'll see you in the next one.